All right, so today we're going to do a deep dive into some philosophy. So really look at how these guys thought about some of the big questions, right? Like freedom and conditioning and morality and truth.
Yeah, huge topics.
Yeah, really big questions.
Yeah.
So I'm really excited to kind of dig into this stuff.
It's going to be so interesting. I mean, they're both such brilliant minds, but they come at things from such different angles.
They really do, right?
Yeah.
It's like they're at opposite ends of the spectrum in a lot of ways.
Totally.
Yeah.
Yeah.
One of the first things that kind of jumps out at me with Nietzsche is this whole thing with Zarathustra, right? He's always using this character Zarathustra to kind of voice his ideas.
It's true, he does. Yeah, it's almost like Zarathustra is this like philosophical prophet.
Yeah, exactly, right.
And what's really interesting is the way Nietzsche describes him. He's not saying that Zarathustra is like against morality or anything like that, but that he's the first one to really see how important the struggle between good and evil is. Like, it's essential to how everything works.
Okay.
Yeah. In fact, he's got this great quote. He says, Zarathustra was the first to see in the struggle between good and evil the essential wheel in the working of things.
Wow, that's a pretty radical idea.
It is.
Yeah. So instead of thinking about good and evil as these like absolutes that are just, out there, Nietzsche's saying that this back and forth, this tension between them, that's what actually creates morality in the first place.
Exactly. He's totally challenging that traditional view that, morality is something that's just handed down to us, from some higher authority.
Yeah.
For Nietzsche, it comes from this like dynamic interplay between these opposite forces.
And this whole emphasis on struggle that seems to connect to another one of his big ideas, right? Truthfulness.
Oh, absolutely. Yeah.
Yeah.
I mean, for Nietzsche, truthfulness is like a core virtue.
It's an act of courage. It's about looking reality straight in the face, even when it's uncomfortable.
Yeah, he says, to tell the truth and to aim straight, that is the first Persian virtue.
Yeah, there you go.
And, that reminds me of something I was reading in Krishnamurti. He doesn't have this kind of character like Zarathustra that he speaks through, but he also talks about how important it is to see things clearly as they are.
It's a great parallel. Yeah, it's like, even though their styles are so different, they're both telling us to drop the illusions, to stop fooling ourselves and really try to get to this deeper understanding of ourselves and the world.
And for Krishnamurti, it seems like a huge part of that is self-knowledge, right? Like not just knowing what you like and dislike, but really understanding the stuff that's going on deep down that shapes how you see the world and how you act. Oh, totally. For Krishnamurti, self-knowledge is key. I mean, he believes that we're all conditioned by all sorts of things, our upbringing, our culture, the experiences we've had, and that all that stuff, it creates a kind of filter that we see the world through.
Right.
So true self-knowledge for him, it involves becoming aware of that filter, understanding how it's coloring our perceptions,
And he has this awesome quote about it. He says, "The world is the projection of ourselves. And to understand the world, we must understand ourselves."
Love that quote.
Yeah, so it's like if we really want to understand why we see the world the way we do, we have to look at the lens we're looking through.
Exactly. And what's kind of scary is that if we're not aware of that conditioning, we might actually mistake our own projections, our own biases for objective reality.
It's like we're walking around with these like invisible glasses on that are distorting everything and we don't even realize it.
Yeah, that's a great way to put it.
Now, something I've been kind of thinking about is that both Nietzsche and Krishnamurti, they seem pretty critical of conventional morality, like following the rules just because they're the rules.
You're right. They both are, yeah.
But I wonder if maybe they're coming at it from different angles.
I think you might be right about that. I mean, for Nietzsche, conventional morality, with all its like rigid rules and pronouncements, it can really stifle people's potential. It keeps them from fully embracing their will to power and achieving greatness,
So for Nietzsche, it's about breaking free from those external constraints, the rules that are imposed on us from outside.
Exactly.
So that we can grow and reach our full potential.
Right. But for Krishnamurti, I think the problem with conventional morality is that it can be a way of avoiding looking inward. It's easier to just follow the rules than to really face the complexities of our own minds and our motivations.
Right.
And he sees true morality as something that comes from self-understanding, not just blindly following some external code.
Okay, so for Krishnamurti, it's more about dismantling those internal barriers.
Yeah.
The stuff that's preventing us from seeing clearly and acting in a way that's true to ourselves.
Exactly. It's about freedom from that psychological conditioning. The stuff that keeps us stuck in these patterns of thought and behavior that might not actually be good for us.
Okay, so even though they're both critiquing conventional morality, they're approaching it from these really different perspectives. One is focused on overcoming the limitations that come from outside.
Right.
And the other is more concerned with his kind of internal freedom.
Exactly.
And that brings us to this really central theme, that both of them are grappling with freedom itself. But I wonder, do they even mean the same thing when they talk about freedom?
That's a huge question, and it gets right to the heart of their different philosophies. I think their conceptions of freedom are really quite distinct.
Okay.
For Nietzsche, freedom is about embracing your will to power. It's about overcoming those societal constraints that we were just talking about and creating your own values.
Right.
Think about Zarathustra, venturing off into solitude to forge his own path,
Yeah, so it's a very active, even heroic kind of freedom.
Right? It is. Yeah, it really is.
It's about shaping your own destiny.
Yes, but for Krishnamurti, freedom is more about this state of inner liberation. It's about freeing yourself from the tyranny of thought, from all those anxieties and attachments that keep us tied down.
Okay.
And he describes this beautifully. He says, "It is only when the mind is not giving continuity to thought, when it is still with a stillness that is not induced, that is without any causation, it is only then that there can be freedom from the background."
So it's like he's saying that real freedom comes from this kind of quiet awareness, a stillness that's not driven by all that mental chatter that we usually have, all those desires and worries.
Exactly. It's freedom from the constant pull of our conditioning, a freedom that allows us to see things with fresh eyes and respond to life with more clarity and compassion.
And that's where we see a key difference in how they approach this whole idea of duality, right?
Yes, exactly. Good versus evil, light versus dark, all those opposing forces.
Yeah.
Nietzsche seems to really embrace this duality.
Yeah.
He sees it as a fundamental aspect of reality.
Like he sees the world as this constant struggle, this battleground of opposing forces.
Right. Remember, he sees the will to power as this driving force in human nature.
Yeah.
And power often involves pushing against resistance, overcoming obstacles. And he sees this tension as a source of creativity and growth.
But Krishnamurti seems to want to move beyond that kind of dualistic thinking, right?
He does, yeah. He argues that this very duality is actually a product of thought. It's our minds that divide the world into these opposites, creating all this separation and conflict.
Okay, I'm trying to wrap my head around that. So he's saying that it's our thinking that actually creates these divisions.
Exactly, yeah.
Interesting.
He writes, "When there is love, self is not self, cannot recognize love."
Okay, that's a little mind-bending. What does love have to do with all this?
Well, he's suggesting that love in its purest form goes beyond that feeling of separation between me and you that our minds create.
Okay.
True love. It happens when we let go of that dualistic way of thinking and we experience a sense of connection with everything.
So for Krishnamurti, moving beyond duality is about experiencing that deeper connection, that sense of oneness with everything around us.
Exactly. And it's in that connection, that sense of unity, that he sees the possibility for real peace and compassion to come about.
Okay, so we've covered a lot of ground here. We've seen how Nietzsche and Krishnamurti have such different takes on freedom, on morality, and even on the nature of reality itself. But now I think it's time to really get into the heart of their philosophies.
I'm ready.
How they each understand the power and the pitfalls of human thought.
Ooh, that's the big one.
Yeah, so that's what we're going to explore the next part of our deep dive.
I can't wait.
All right, we'll be right back.
So welcome back. We've been talking about Nietzsche and Krishnamurti and their very different ideas about freedom and morality and the whole nature of reality itself. Right, exactly.
Now I think it's time to really get into the core of their philosophies.
Yeah.
How they each understand thought, the power of thought and the problems that it can create.
Okay, so let's get inside their heads.
Yeah, let's do it.
So for Nietzsche, it seems like thought is this incredibly powerful tool, maybe even a weapon.
Yeah. That's a great way to put it.
Right.
He really sees thought as this force, for creation, for self-overcoming, for achieving greatness. He writes in Thus Spoke Zarathustra, "Man cannot endure it that such a witness should live."
Okay.
And he's talking about a God, who sees everything humans do.
Right.
So for Nietzsche, the power of the human mind is so strong that it can even challenge the idea of an all-seeing God.
Wow. So it's almost like he's saying that the human mind is so potent that it can actually reshape reality itself.
Right, exactly.
But I'm guessing Krishnamurti has a very different take on the whole thought thing.
Oh, yeah, definitely. I mean, for Krishnamurti, thought is often the source of our problems, not the solution.
He sees it as the root of our anxieties, our fears, our attachments. Yeah. All that mental chatter, it keeps us from experiencing peace and clarity.
So if Nietzsche sees thought as this powerful tool for shaping the world, Krishnamurti is kind of more cautious about it, even wary of its potential to create suffering.
Exactly. And he writes, thought is verbalized sensation. Thought is the responsive memory. The word, the experience, the image thought is transient, changing, impermanent, and it is seeking permanency.
So he's saying that thought is always trying to grab onto things, to make them permanent.
Yes, yes.
When in reality, everything is always changing.
Exactly. And that clinging, that grasping, that's what creates suffering. We try to hold on to things that are constantly changing, and that just creates, friction, anxiety, a sense of unease.
So Krishnamurti is urging us to let go of that clinging. Right? To stop trying to control our thoughts and just observe them.
Exactly.
Is that what he means by choiceless awareness?
You know it. Yeah, choiceless awareness is all about cultivating this state of mindfulness where we're just watching our thoughts without judging them, without getting caught up in their stories. It's about recognizing that thoughts are just thoughts. They're not necessarily true or false. They just arise and pass away like clouds in the sky.
It's like instead of being tossed around by the waves of our thoughts, we learn to kind of ride them, observe them without getting swept away.
Yeah, that's a great image.
And it really highlights this fundamental difference between them in how they see the relationship between the mind and reality.
Right.
So for Nietzsche, the mind is like a tool to be wielding, a force to be harnessed, for achieving greatness.
Yeah.
But for Krishnamurti, the mind is something to be observed, to be understood, to be quieted, so that a deeper awareness can kind of emerge.
Exactly.
So in our philosophical boxing ring, if Nietzsche is all about using the power of thought to conquer the world, Krishnamurti is more about stepping out of the ring altogether, transcending the limitations of thought to experience this more profound reality.
Love that analogy.
And what's so cool is that even though they seem to be coming from such completely different places, they're both ultimately trying to help us to live more fulfilling, more meaningful lives.
That's so true. Yeah.
So whether it's Nietzsche's call to embrace our will to power or Krishnamurti's invitation to cultivate choiceless awareness, they're both offering us these paths towards greater freedom, authenticity, and understanding.
Yeah, they really are. And that's what makes exploring these guys so rewarding. They challenge us to look at our own assumptions, to question our habitual ways of thinking, and to consider new possibilities for how we interact with the world and with ourselves.
Okay, so we've spent some time in the ring with Nietzsche and Krishnamurti unpacking their ideas.
Yeah, definitely.
Which are so profound and often completely opposed to each other.
Right.
But now I think it's time for a little thought experiment.
Okay, I like where this is going.
Let's imagine what it would be like if these two philosophical giants sat down for a cup of coffee and actually had a chance to chat.
I love that philosophical coffee date.
Right.
Who wouldn't want to eavesdrop on that conversation?
I know, right?
Yeah.
So in our next segment, we're going to try to channel Nietzsche and Krishnamurti.
Okay.
And see if we can create a dialogue between these two contrasting perspectives.
Sounds fun. I'm in.
All right. So we're back and we're imagining Nietzsche and Krishnamurti having this coffee date, right?
Yeah, they're sitting there, coffee's getting cold, and they're just staring at each other.
I can almost see Nietzsche, with that intense look in his eyes, leaning forward and saying something like, you talk about freedom from conditioning, from the limitations of thought, but isn't that just another form of weakness?
Oh, wow.
Don't we need our will to power, that drive to create, to overcome?
It's such a good question. It really cuts to the core of how differently they think about freedom.
Right.
And I imagine Krishnamurti, with his quiet presence, he might respond with something like, but isn't that will to power itself a product of conditioning, a form of clinging that creates separation and conflict?
Right.
True freedom lies in letting go of that grasping and seeing things as they are without the distortion of the ego.
So it's like their ideas about freedom are totally tied up with how they understand the self, right?
Yeah.
For Nietzsche, the self is something to be cultivated, strengthened, even transcended, through the will to power.
Right.
But for Krishnamurti, the self, as we usually think of it, is actually the source of our suffering.
Exactly. And that difference, in how they see the self, it shapes their ideas about morality, too. I can totally picture Nietzsche challenging Krishnamurti's idea of moving beyond good and evil. You know, he might say, without that tension between those forces, life loses its spark, its energy. Embrace the struggle, become the Übermensch, the one who creates their own values.
And so Nietzsche always pushing the limits, challenging us to think differently. But how do you think Krishnamurti would respond to that?
I think he might gently point out that even the act of creating your own values can be a sneaky kind of egotism, a way of reinforcing that sense of separation between me and the world. He might say something like, true morality comes not from forcing our will on the world, but from cultivating compassion and recognizing that we're all connected.
So for Krishnamurti, it's not about imposing our own values, but about aligning ourselves with a deeper kind of ethical order that's already there.
Exactly. And that order for him is based on love, compassion, and understanding. It's about seeing past that illusion of separation and recognizing our fundamental unity with all beings.
Okay, so even in their disagreements,
yeah,
I'm seeing this common thread.
Yeah, me too.
They're both ultimately concerned with helping us to live more authentic, more meaningful lives.
It's true.
Nietzsche wants us to embrace our power, to overcome our limitations, and to create something amazing. Krishnamurti wants us to let go of those ego-driven desires, to quiet our minds, and to experience that deeper connection to the world around us.
And what's amazing is that even though this is just a hypothetical conversation, it sparked so many new questions for me.
Yeah.
It makes you want to keep thinking, keep exploring.
Yeah, and that's the power of great philosophy, right?
It is. It really is.
It doesn't give us all the answers, but it opens up new ways of seeing things, new possibilities.
Exactly.
So to our listeners, we leave you with this. If you could join Nietzsche and Krishnamurti at their coffee date, what would you ask them?
Oh, that's good.
And which of their insights really speaks to you?
Yeah, keep those questions in mind.
Keep exploring these ideas. And as always, thanks for joining us on The Deep Dive.